The film cuts to 1995, the dense fog-drenched forests of Oregon stretching endlessly under a gray, oppressive sky. Young Blake, barely 10 years old, clutches a rifle almost as long as his own arm. His father, Grady, leads the way, his broad shoulders cutting through the trees like a prow through icy waters. Grady's every step is purposeful, his head on a constant swivel as he scans the trees for movement. The pair spots a deer, and aim to put it down, but it manages to move further into the forest. Blake follows it and takes aim, but he then sees a humanoid creature. Without a word, his father grabs his arm and tells him to go to the nearby hunting blind, an old, elevated structure nestled between the thick trunks of two ancient trees. They scramble up the rickety ladder, their boots clanging against the metal rungs. They crouch low, breath steaming in the cold air, their hearts pounding in the tight enclosed space. From their hidden perch, they peer through the slats, the dense foliage below rustling as something large and unnatural moves through the shadows. That night, Blake wakes to the sound of his father's hushed, frantic voice. Grady is on his two-way radio, his voice a strained, breathless whisper as he tells the other hunters in the area that he's seen a werewolf. Blake shivers, his young mind struggling to process the fear and dread in his father's usually steady tone. The radio crackles back a series of disjointed, panicked responses before Grady shuts it off, the sudden silence more deafening than the static. 30 years later, Blake is a grown man, living in a modest apartment in San Francisco with his wife, Charlotte, and their young daughter, Ginger. Despite the distance from his childhood trauma, the specter of that night in the woods still haunts him, its shadow seeping into his every interaction. Like his father before him, Blake struggles with anger issues, his temper a barely contained storm that often lashes out at those closest to him, fraying the fragile threads of his marriage. That morning, Blake receives a letter informing him of his father's presumed death. The old man's secluded Oregon property, the place where Blake's childhood nightmares first took root, has now passed to him. Charlotte sees this as a chance for them to reconnect, to escape the suffocating confines of city life and perhaps even heal the wounds that have slowly torn their family apart. The next day, the family piles into their truck, the engine rumbling to life as they pull away from the bustling streets of San Francisco, the fog-shrouded mountains of Oregon looming in the distance. As they wind their way through the dense, ancient forests, the tension in the car slowly gives way to laughter and light-hearted riddles, a rare moment of genuine connection for the fractured family. But as the trees close in around them and the shadows lengthen, Blake's confidence falters. He stares at the road ahead, brow furrowing as they approach the driveway to his father's property, only to find a different gate blocking their path. Suddenly, Ginger points out the treehouse perched high in the branches to their left. Blake's heart skips a beat as he catches a flash of movement, a man descending from the treehouse, his weathered face and rough calloused hands betraying a life spent in the wilderness. The man approaches, and introduces himself as Derek, a local hunter and old acquaintance of Grady's. He offers to guide them to the old farmhouse, his eyes sharp and unreadable as he studies Blake's face. As they go down a narrow overgrown path, Blake grips the steering wheel tighter, his pulse quickening as they round a bend and come face to face with a figure on the road. Blake yanks the wheel to the right, the truck's tires skidding over loose gravel and pine needles as they crash through a thicket of trees and branches. The truck finally slides to a stop at the base of a steep hill. Blake shakes his head, trying to clear the ringing in his ears as the world slowly tilts back into focus. But before he can fully regain his senses, a massive, clawed hand reaches into the shattered window, slashing at his arm and dragging Derek screaming into the darkened forest. Blake stumbles out of the truck, blood dripping from the fresh gashes on his forearm. Grabbing Charlotte and Ginger, he shouts for them to run, his voice raw and desperate as they bolt toward the distant silhouette of the old farmhouse, their feet pounding against the moss-covered ground. The creature's howls grow closer, each guttural roar sending fresh spikes of terror through Blake's mind. He descends into the basement, the air thick with dust and the sharp, metallic scent of old tools as he fumbles for the main power switch. With a flick, the house flickers to life, the overhead bulbs buzzing as they cast long jagged shadows across the cracked walls, the property illuminated for the first time in months. Later, once Ginger is fully asleep, Charlotte pulls Blake aside, her voice a harsh whisper. She asks him directly what he saw out there in the woods, what kind of creature ripped Derek from the truck and nearly ended their lives. Blake, his mind still reeling from the encounter, struggles to find the right words. He finally tells her that he saw a werewolf. He then drags a heavy, dust-covered bookshelf across the living room, trying to reinforce their fragile barrier against the creature outside. His mind races as he searches for anything that might give them an edge, his pulse still hammering in his ears. Rummaging through the dimly lit shelves, Blake pulls out his father's old two-way radio. He flicks the switch and brings it to his lips, his voice shaking as he tries to call for help. He waits for a response, but the only reply is the low hum of static, Suddenly, Blake catches a strange, metallic scent, something raw and coppery, seeping from a dark corner of the room. Following the scent, he stumbles upon a hidden door in the wall. Inside, he finds a stash of raw bloody meat, stacked carelessly in the room. Blake reaches down and picks up a chunk of the meat, his hands shaking as he tears off a piece and shoves it into his mouth. As he chews, a sharp pain shoots through his jaw, and something hard clatters on his hand. He looks down to see one of his teeth, long and sharp, streaked with blood. Charlotte quickly grabs a tissue from the aid box, telling Blake to press it to his mouth to stop the bleeding. She then notices the deep, jagged wound on his forearm. She pours hydrogen peroxide over the gash, the liquid fizzing and hissing as it meets the torn flesh, and quickly wraps the wound in a makeshift bandage. While in the kitchen, Blake hears scuttling from above, a quick sharp tapping like claws against wood, and slowly climbs the stairs to investigate. He braces himself for another nightmarish encounter, but when he reaches the attic door and pushes it open, the only thing there is a small spider, its thin, hairy legs skittering across the dusty floorboards. Blake blinks, his mind struggling to comprehend the scene as his heart pounds in his chest, his senses heightened to a painful, almost overwhelming degree. Descending the stairs, his feet dragging against the creaking wood, Blake suddenly freezes, his head snapping toward the front window as a shadow passes across the porch light. He gestures to Charlotte to stay silent, his heart racing as the creature's ragged breaths reach his ears. Each exhale is a low, guttural growl that sends chills down his spine. Without warning, the werewolf smashes through the front door, its clawed hand latching onto Blake's leg. Charlotte screams, grabbing a knife and cutting the creature's arm, forcing it to let go of Blake. Later on, Blake regains consciousness and struggles to his feet, his hearing sharpened to a painful degree, the sounds of Charlotte's whispered pleas and Ginger's soft sobs crashing against his eardrums like gunshots. He staggers down the basement and finds his wife frantically whispering into her phone, her hands shaking as she tries to reach someone for help. But Blake can't make out her words, the language suddenly alien to him. As she turns, their eyes meet, and for a fleeting moment, Blake sees a flicker of hope in her gaze, a desperate belief that her husband might still be in there somewhere. But as he stumbles closer, the hope in her eyes dies, replaced by a terror so raw and consuming that it cuts through the fog in his mind like a blade. Suddenly, his bladder gives out, a warm shameful wetness spreading down his leg. Charlotte gasps, and leads him to the bathroom to get him cleaned up. Desperate, Charlotte grabs a notepad from the kitchen counter, thrusting it into his hands, her eyes searching for any flicker of the man she married. Blake stares down at the blank page, he scrawls a single, jagged word onto the paper, dying. Charlotte's lips quiver, her body shaking as she reads the word. She shakes her head, refusing to let him die. Suddenly, without thinking, he bites into his own forearm, his teeth sinking deep into the muscle and sinew, tearing a chunk of flesh away as warm blood spurts from the wound. Charlotte stumbles back, her eyes wide with horror, struggling to comprehend the nightmare unfolding before her. Realizing the immediate danger, Charlotte backs away, her mind racing for a way out. She spots the old car keys and faded battery on the shelf. She grabs them both and together, they creep out the side door, the cool night air stinging their cheeks as they slip toward the pickup truck parked by the shed. Charlotte fumbles with the battery, her fingers trembling, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps as she connects the terminals, praying the engine will turn over. But before she can even close the hood, a massive, hulking shape emerges from the shadows, the werewolf snarling. Charlotte screams, grabbing Ginger by the wrist and bolting for the greenhouse. They stumble on the greenhouse. For a moment, there's silence but, without warning, a clawed hand smashes through the greenhouse, almost causing Ginger to fall. Blake gestures at Charlotte, telling her to rush home with Ginger as he distracts the werewolf. Charlotte grabs Ginger by the arm and bolts for the house. Later, Blake returns but vomits the werewolf's finger. He then charges at Charlotte but holds himself back from attacking her. Realizing that he might harm his family, Blake decides to leave, but the werewolf pushes him back into the house and the two collide in a whirlwind of fur, teeth, and claws, their bodies crashing into the rusted shelves. Blake's hands tighten around the creature's neck, his teeth bared, and bites down on its neck. With a final, bone-crunching snap, the werewolf slumps, its body twitching as its life ebbs away. Blake staggers back, his breath catches as he recognizes the tattoo on the creature's mangled shoulder, a military emblem, faded but still recognizable, the same one his father wore on his forearm. Blake stumbles back, a horrifying realization crashes over him. The werewolf he just slaughtered was his father. Blake then rushes out of the house, leaving Charlotte and Ginger behind. Outside, Blake's muscles convulse as the full transformation overtakes him. He doubles over, his fingers clawing, as his nails crack and fall out, splattering the dirt with small, bloodied crescents. Black claws then force their way through his splitting fingertips. His eyes widen, the world around him shifting, the sharp outlines of the trees, the flickering farmhouse lights, and the dark shapes moving inside all sharpening into crystal clarity, even through the pitch-black night. Inside, Charlotte paces, her hands trembling as she tries to piece together what's happening to Blake. Suddenly, the lights flicker off, plunging the farmhouse into darkness. Then, Blake appears in the doorway, his eyes glowing with predatory hunger. Charlotte pulls Ginger with her, racing toward the barn. Minutes pass, the silence stretching until it snaps like a straining rope. The barn doors explode inward, splinters flying, the rusted chains clattering against the walls as Blake bursts in. Charlotte and Ginger scramble into the shadows, pressing themselves against the dark. Unbeknownst to them, Blake can now see clearly in the dark and approaches them. Unfortunately, his foot crushes onto a rusted bear trap hidden beneath the straw. Charlotte seizes the moment, pulling Ginger with her as they bolt for the barn door, bursting out into the cold night. As they race deeper into the woods, branches snapping beneath their feet, Charlotte stumbles over a mud-caked hunting rifle, its derricks, abandoned in the chaos of their earlier escape. They scramble up the ladder to the treehouse, their chests heavy. Suddenly, Blake emerges from the underbrush, his hulking form moving with a feral, predatory grace, his yellow eyes fixed on the treehouse. Charlotte squeezes the trigger, the rifle bucking against her shoulder, the echo of the gunshot reverberating through the trees as the bullet tears through Blake's chest. Charlotte and Ginger collapse into each other, their bodies shaking as the forest falls silent once more, the echo of the gunshot fading into the early morning, as they realize that their lives have completely changed now. Make sure to like, comment and subscribe for more notifications. Until next time. See you soon.